Hey there folks, Wrel here. So I've been sharing changes to Indar every now and again, all the terrain work that I've been doing through Twitter, Reddit, occasionally this channel, and quite often people will ask, why are you working on Indar when Esamir and Hassan have so many problems? It's a fair question that comes down to priorities, manpower, and return on investment. Back when I first teased the changes to TI alloys, it was only a background project that would go live just whenever we got around to it, and our main focus on the time was actually on getting Econom done and finishing up Amrish. Econom took way longer than it should have, mostly due to running into some surprising performance concerns, especially as it related to the PS4 version of the game. And by performance, I'm primarily talking about frame rates and memory consumption. So we spent time making it look decent while also hammering out the performance concerns, and as a result, it turned out to be one of the best performing bases in the game, even with an absurd amount of players in and around it. Now, Econom was an important concept to explore because it tests out a number of different concepts that we can extrapolate to other bases and such. It was the first base to have construction integrated into the lattice. It was the first live base to get vehicle capture points integrated into them. It was the first base to have a truly underground place base because that tech was new. It integrated a PlanetSide 1 style courtyard for vehicles and indoors for infantry type separation, and it had lattice links which technically allow you to bypass the facility altogether if you want. That's something that actually hasn't been done since the very early days of the game. Now on top of that, the old Econom Biolab was a failed experiment to try to fix biolabs and make the flow a little bit better, but it turned out to be one of the worst biolabs in the game. It was a confusing, half-finished mess that was long overdue for replacement. Having those Econom concepts out in the world on what's already one of the best continents allows us to ensure that every time Amrish is up, you're still going to have a solid map to fight on, and being as popular as Amrish is, it allows us to extract the data that we need to extrapolate some of these concepts. So when it was decided that Econom was going to take a while, we wanted to invest a couple more weeks and do as much as we could to the rest of the map, and a lot of the problem bases got revamped because of it, along with visual improvements to the environment. Now, incremental adjustments to the map at the moment, and certainly in the past, are not economically viable because of the download size, or so I've been told. So when you update a map, it's really an all or nothing play. And when you do that much work, it allows you to market the update as something noteworthy. If it were just adding Econom, the impact would have been much lesser than the Amrish refresh that we ended up with, which only took us, again, a couple more weeks of work. With that update, Biolabs got their Opaque Domes as well. While not as visually appealing as the transparent ones, it allowed us to cull the props on the inside of the dome, which means that you get improved performance both in and outside the Biolabs themselves. And this is a good thing since performance remains to be one of the top concerns players have to date. In order to get that performance benefit, however, we need to do a visibility export. And a visibility export basically lets the game know what objects are in the player's line of sight or out of their line of sight at any given time anywhere in the world. That way it can cull the objects that you don't need to see, which means better performance. The game would not run without it. However, since the new TI alloys was already on PTS at the time, along with some other experiments with the hard spawns, thanks to the Combined Arms Initiative, we could only do the visibility exports on Esamir, Amrish, and Hassan. It's not a trivial task to load the live version of the continent into the terrain editor, do the visibility export, and then go back to the internal build that you were working on, but it also wasn't the end of the world to just wait on that viz export for Indar. It did, however, give us a good reason to want to get Indar ready for a big update later on down the line. Alongside putting out new content, squashing bugs, dealing with hackers, and everything else, we were able to set aside a few weeks to knock out some of the base changes on Indar so that we can turn it into a bigger content update than just releasing TI alloys. Now, what we didn't want to do is revamp Indar again. That would not have made sense to do because a revamp implies that you're kind of committing a lot of resources to revitalizing the experience in a sort of a holistic view. But Indar already got a couple revamps in the past, and regardless of what we do with it, it's always going to be a popular continent because it has the most varied terrain, it has multiple biomes, and it was the first continent. So the changes being made to Indar right now are just me hammering on a handful of bases. I'm making some obvious lattice adjustments and alleviating some well-worn problem areas. Anything beyond that is just not worth the return on time spent. That may not necessarily answer the, well, why not Esamir or Hassan question, but it's important to get the context first. So Esamir and Hassan are nightmares for different reasons, and both will take a substantial amount of work to get into a state that we can feel good about, and also mark it as a significant improvement to the game. So if we're going to work on those, there needs to be a very focused effort that will take months to complete. It can, of course, be worked on in the background, but when that happens, it basically prevents us from patching out bugs while the continent is being worked on. So let's say, for example, that somebody finds a new construction exploit, or as an infantry, they can glitch into a rock somewhere, or if there's a problem with visibility, creating flickering or disappearing objects. Our options for patching out those issues in a timely manner can be very, very limited. In a worst case scenario, we just need to wait for the continent to be completed. It's the same reason we couldn't release the visibility changes to Indar because of TI outlays existing in the state that it was on PTS. Now, the reason these continents would take such a massive amount of work is because they have pretty significant issues. Esamir's walls are notorious for creating farmable bowls of infantry for vehicles to mindlessly fire upon. Ironically, the walls were put there in place to keep vehicles out. A+ for effort, F- for execution. On top of the farmables, the lattice also needs a rework, and the continent is unbalanced with that southeastern area being what it is. Fixing this proper could mean moving the southwestern warp gate, which means moving the bases that are already there, which means moving the bases elsewhere because of the bases that got moved. It could potentially be a really, really messy thing depending on what kind of approach is taken to fix the continent as a whole. For Hassan, the base design was generally better for infantry, worse for vehicles in a not fun way. The terrain is a mess, not to mention the continent itself is simply unfinished. Plateaus with nothing on them, ground textures that don't have proper impact effects when you shoot them, the water texture flickers and is broken, terrain seams everywhere, floating props, and that's alongside the general feeling of gloominess that players just do not enjoy playing on. If Hassan were to get a revision, it'd need to get sledgehammered in a lot of different ways. Fortunately though, the lattice and the base placement is probably one of the best of any continent. I said earlier that these continents would take a substantial amount of time, likely not only from the designers but the art team as well. With the team size being as small as it is, this is a risky proposition, and with the current state of the game, even if the commitment is worthwhile, the timing may not be right. This is an extreme example, but if you remember back in second year of the game, there was an initiative called Operation Make Game Faster, which basically halted all production of content and fixes so that performance could be improved. The all stop on content was probably more symbolic than anything else because designers certainly do not need to stop what they're doing to help with performance. Most of that lays firmly in the hands of code and art, but they did, and it could just be my memory, but the drought of content was not a great time for the community. If we had one of those now, an all stop on content, it would be a surefire game killer. There are very few situations that can kill this game, but lack of updates, lack of content, that is absolutely one of them. Of course, we, being the team that we are, would not stop content production for the sake of focusing on a continent. There would always be, at the very least, something new and shiny for players to explore while work on the continent was underway. But since our team size is small, the resources that we can juggle between a continent and content would be limited. So hopefully that sheds some light on why Indar, at least why right now. Esamir and Hassan, they definitely need some adjustments, but again, the timing may not be right. It's certainly something that I want to do though, and that is worthwhile. So we'll continue to look into it, but until then, I'm looking forward to seeing what you all think about the new bases on Indar once they get to live, and that should be in the pretty near future. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you have any thoughts on what you'd like to see in the future with that content balancing act in mind, go ahead and share them in the comments section down below. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.